9. Inside the Ori warship. Ori warship, cargo bay 12.02.2022, 1401. Laura Cadman stepped into the cargo bay. Alec Carlson, Jin, Daniel Jackson, Nicholas Rush, and Adam Volker were waiting for her. During her time on Spira, she had read up on the Ori. Still seeing a ship like this firsthand was impressive. She joined the others and gave Rush a nod. The Scottish scientist approached the bulkhead with the only door out of the room. He worked the controls next to the door, and the door slid open. Tilda, where's the power coming from? Tilda, they made their way into the corridor beyond. // woe // Volker began. // looks like Atlantis got some good punches in. // The corridor was badly damaged. Pieces of bulkhead were missing, lights were broken, and circuits were exposed. The gravity was also offline, so pieces of metal were floating all over the place. They began making their way down the corridor slowly. Eventually, they reached a section that was blocked by debris. Fortunately, there was a door nearby. Rush opened the door to reveal a set of quarters. The room was in bad shape, with 2 dead humans and a dead Vanir on the floor. Looking up, Cadman realized that the ceiling had been blasted away. Above the quarters was what was left of an auxiliary control room. // we need to get up there, // Jackson said. // if there is any data left the computers, that's where we can find it, // Pushing off from the floor as best as the spacesuit allowed, Cadman discovered that the local gravity was much lower than Earth sea level. She landed next to a badly damaged control console. There was 2 doors out of the room. One was clearly placed to lead to the corridor, the other led to a room next to control room. Following Cadman's example, the others made their way to the control room as well. As they did that, Cadman opened the door to corridor, but there was no corridor. The whole section was missing. So she moved to the other door. It opened to reveal another cargo bay. There was another door across from the one she had used to enter. While she had been exploring, Carlson and Volker had set about hooking up their laptops to the control consoles. Besides the damaged console, there were 2 functional ones. Jackson and Volker were at one console, while Rush and Carlson were at the other. Jin followed Cadman into the cargo bay. // looks like there was nothing in here, // she said, as reached Cadman. // the cargo bay we arrived in appeared to have been full of supplies before the hull was breached, // good point // Cadman reached the door and tried to open it, but nothing happened. // the door is locked. // she turned to face Jin. // do you have a scanner? // yes, Jin said, as she detached a scanner from her left leg. // let's see what we can see. // Jin set to scanning. As she was doing that, the translation program on Carlson's laptop was doing its job. Because of the spacesuits, it had not been easy to connect the laptop. And even with the laptop connected, there was only so much he could do. There were several security lockouts, keeping them from operating the main systems. // I've found where the power is coming from, // Volker said. // it looks like there are several emergency power cells keeping the systems going, // looks like there is a small pocket of atmosphere and gravity nearby, // Jackson said. // that explains the lockouts, // Rush began. // it's so that nobody can route the power away from that area, // I hate to interrupt, // Equals slashback slash equals, Jin said from the cargo bay. Equals slashback slash equals, but Colonel Cadman and I have already found your pocket. Equals slashback slash equals. Jin's scan had revealed that the room beyond the cargo bay had Earth sea level gravity. It also had atmosphere and 7 life forms inside. There was also a dampening field that blocked scanners. The only reason Jin had been able to detect them was because she was standing right next to the room. After her scan, she had moved to the other side of the cargo bay. The life signs had vanished when she had been halfway. Jackson and Coulson joined Jin and Cadman, while Volker and Rush continued work on the consoles. Equals slashback slash equals so. Now what? Equals slashback slash equals, Jin asked. Equals slashback slash equals, something tells me this is not going to be easy. Equals slashback slash equals, Cadman began. Equals slashback slash equals, whoever is in there, they are probably not going to be the friendly sort. Equals slashback slash equals. Jackson nodded. He had a feeling that Cadman's assessment was spot on. Ori Warship Section 1712.0 2.2022 1435. Tommen held his weapon at the ready. He was waiting for the Terrans to breach their little bubble and kill them all. Tilda, after all these years, it's about to end here. Tilda, his people's fight had begun when the Terrans had launched an invasion of the Ori galaxy. That had been in the Terran year 1997. For 25 years, Ori had fought for every inch of their home. But eventually, the Terrans had found the last resistance holdout and bombarded it out of existence. This ship, the Liberty, had barely escaped that attack. It had launched a last desperate attack on Atlantis. They had destroyed the city, but the Liberty had taken major damage. Tommen was one of only 7 people to survive the attack, and the only one with a weapon. Tilda, talk about irony. Tilda, during his childhood, there had been an accident that had left him sterile and lame. This had made his unsuited for military service. But as the war continued, the Ori had needed more soldiers, so they had begun something called the Phoenix program. The Phoenix had been a warship that had been converted into a giant flying hospital. She had traveled from planet to planet, finding people who, with the Ori's advanced medical technology, could be cured of the issues that made them unsuitable for service. The regulars' troops had looked down on these, Phoenix soldiers. But now one of them, Tommen, who had been cured in 2005, was the last one left. How much longer? One of Tommen's companions asked. Not much longer, Daniel, Tommen said. They're working on getting the door open. Dr. Daniel Jackson had been a Terran medical doctor. He was also been amongst the founders of a group called Colonials. The Colonials were a group of Terrans who thought the Empire and its methods were wrong. So they had begun to bend the rules as much as they could, essentially becoming a resistance movement inside the Empire. Recently, however, the Empire had no longer needed to divide its attention between the Colonials and the Ori. This had forced several Colonials, including Jackson, to flee to the Ori holdout of New Carthage Prime. This planet that had been bombarded in the last Terran attack. I can't believe it's going to end like this, Jackson said. Tommen nodded. The room they were had been built as a fighter bay, but after the attack on New Carthage Prime, it had been converted into a place to house refugees. There had not been any fighters to launch from the bay anyway. They had all been lost in prior battles. The area around the bay had been badly damaged, so once the Terrans opened the door, there would be nowhere to run. He had barely completed the thought when the door opened. Tommen opened fire with his weapon. It was a Terran energy weapon called a Intar. The Intar was practice weapon that only stunned, but he did not complain. Once the Terrans were stunned, they would be able to throw them out the airlock, which would be the end of them. These weapons could take any shape the Terrans wanted. In this case, it appeared like a Terran MP5. Die, Terran scum, Tommen yelled. =//==. We're not Terrans, =//=, a male voice said. Yeah, right, Tommen began. And I'm the Emperor of Oz. Equals slash back slash equals the great and powerful Oz equals slash back slash equals. The reply made Tommen pause, which was a mistake. He didn't see the weapon that hit him. Just an electrical flash which hit him in the chest before his knees buckled and the world faded to black. Liberty Fighter Bay 12.0 2.2022 1520. Tommen woke with a headache the size of the Liberty. He opened his eyes to see two Daniel Jacksons. One was wearing a doctor's coat and blue scrubs, the other was wearing some kind of military uniform, but not a Terran uniform. At the sight of two Daniel Jacksons, there was only one thing for him to say. "Oh no, they send me downstairs." "Very funny, Tommen," the medical Dr. Jackson said, "but you are still in the land of the living." He slowly sat up and looked around. There were two puddle jumpers parked in the bay, and there were now plenty of people in the room. Besides the 7 survivors, there were no less than 16 of these newcomers. He was about to ask who these people were when he saw something that took his breath away. One of the newcomers was Vala. That's impossible. Vala, his beloved Vala, had died in his arms 3 years ago. She had been killed by General O'Neill, whom Tommen had executed. He got up from the bunk he had been on and approached her. "Vala." "Hello, Tommen," she said with a smile. "How is this possible? You died 3 years ago." "It's a long story." Vala took his hand and led him to the bunk. "But I'll explain everything." They sat down, and Vala began explaining about how she was from an alternate universe. The two Jacksons had been comparing notes while Tommen had been passed out. Liberty's Jackson had given Volker and Coulson an override code that allowed them to access the logs so that they could figure out what had happened to bring them to this universe. At the same time, he had also told them about their home universe and its history. The local Jackson had then told him about the history of the Tory universe. The knowledge that they had destroyed the wrong Atlantis had shocked the Liberty survivors. As Vala explained about the trap the Terrans had set for the Wraith, the Tory and their allies and the Resistance, it clicked in his head. "They wanted collect food and to take us out of the picture in one swoop," Tommen said. "Yes," Vala began, "while taking out any competition at the same time." "So what do we do now?" Tommen asked. "We're working on finding out how exactly you ended up here," the local Jackson said. "Once we know that, we can come up with a plan to sabotage their sabotage of the Liberty." "What are you talking about? The sabotage and the attack on Atlantis have already happened," Tommen said as he turned to Jackson. "Unless you have a time machine, there is nothing we can do." "Actually," a male voice said, "that might not be so far-fetched." Tommen turned to see Cameron Mitchell, which made him frown. Mitchell had been the commander of the Phoenix and had been killed when the hospital ship had been destroyed during the attack on New Carthage Prime. This whole alternate universe thing was going to take some getting used to. Stargate Command General's Office 13.0 2.2022 0800. Dennis Kersey sat in his office. He had eaten breakfast in the mess hall before heading to his office. This were rather quiet at Stargate Command. With SG-1 away to Pegasus, SG-2 was now the flagship team. They were also the only team currently off-world. So Kersey was free to read the latest reports. SG-1 and its expedition team had found a small group of survivors aboard the Ori warship. And between the survivors and the ship's computer, they had found Stargate Command the answers they had been looking for. It turned out that a Terran spy had attached a device to the hyperdrive that had turned the engine into a dimension drive. The good news was that they knew where the device was now. The bad news was that the device was fused with the hyperdrive, which meant that removing it for study was not an option. They had also found a beacon, which was how the Terrans had been able to track the Liberty during its trip. But more important had been discovering the identity of the Terran spy. They had discovered that it was an engineer called Tyler McNamara. That done, the team and the survivors had then returned to the Spira. As for the time travel plan, it made Kersey's head spin. If this succeeded in preventing the destruction of Atlantis, wouldn't they end up deleting the currently timeline and thus themselves? Which would then keep them from preventing the destruction of Atlantis, thus putting the timeline back to its original form. Tilda thus keeping the timeline in a constant state of flux. Tilda he leaned back and sighing, trying not think about it too hard. Time travel is always complicated, sir, a female voice said. He looked up to see Dr. Carolyn Lamb standing in the doorway. Despite the retirement of her father, General Hank Landry, Dr. Lamb was still the chief medical officer of Stargate Command. Before Kersey had become the base CO, he had only met the doctor twice. Since then, they had talked several times, but the general was still not that familiar with the doctor. Dr. Lamb, what brings you to my corner of the mountain? Paperwork, sir. He offered him a folder, which Kersey took. Dr. Beckett send through his report on the Ori rebels, sir. Basically, they are ordinary humans like you and me, sir. Thank you, Doctor. Lamb nodded and left Kersey to keep reading reports. He had a feeling that if this time travel plan succeeded or not, that the worryless days that begun in 2017 were about to end. After the end of the war between the Lucian Alliance and the New Asurans, the Tory and their allies had lacked any major enemies. But now, the Terrans were about to change all that. Tilda, if we save Atlantis or not. Tilda, it was something that he would to discuss with the President and IOA. But that was a tomorrow problem. Today, he had to worry about yesterday. 10. What about Colonel Shepard? Sub-Atlantis House 13.0 2.2022 0800. Shepard was eating the weirdest breakfast, a mix of potatoes, strawberries, and eggs. After a couple of hours, he had gone back to the market and successfully sold the 2 jackets. He had quickly discovered that clothing was worth a lot of money. Tilda, or what passes for money around here. Tilda, as for what he had bought, the pickings had been slim. Strawberries and potatoes were the only grown thing. Beyond this, the only foodstuff available were eggs, which were the most expensive thing around, and rat meat. Shepard was not desperate enough to eat rat. Tilda yet. Tilda, so he had skipped the meat. He also figured that they needed to save the rest of their money. Their breakfast had taken about a third of the cash they had. Where did you get the firewood? Zara asked, while Shepard thought it was odd to see a Wraith eat normal food. Somebody chopped up the stalls of the people who were killed, Shepard said. He had been handed a bundle of firewood by an old, thin human. The man had not said a word. They had found a pot and 4 plates in the tiny kitchen of the house. The only other in the kitchen had been a single knife. Shepard had then proceeded to make breakfast. As he had done so, he had begun plotting their escape. The first piece of the puzzle was a ventilation shaft that was wedged between their house and the next one. He knew that the shaft was too narrow to pass through, but he figured it would allow them to communicate with the lower circles. Zara, has anybody ever escaped from sub-Atlantis? No, even if you make it to the surface, that would only put you in the city proper. That's why the security goes up as you go down, Banks began, because the lowest circle is near the bottom of Mesa. Yes, Zara said. I've never been down there, but I've overheard guards talking. If somebody ever managed to break the outer wall, they could walk out into the desert. But there is nowhere to go, Colonel. There's only sand out there. One miracle at a time, Shepard said. He finished his breakfast and dropped his plate in the kitchen sink. Then he went outside to get a closer look at the ventilation shaft. It was carved from the rock, with rusty metal ventilators pushing the air around. Shepard pointed his weapon at the shaft and pulled the trigger. Sub-Atlantis Cell 13.0 2.2022 0800. This morning. Guide had fed on 2 more elderly humans. They had given him just enough years to keep him from starving, but it was clear that remaining here was not an option, so he would have to escape this place. The problem was that the cell he was in had clearly been built to prevent just that. Then he noticed the floor. It was made out of slabs of stone. Some were big, others were small. Tilda, it's not much, but it's better than nothing. Tilda and one of the humans he had fed on had carried a spoon. Tilda, this will have to do. Tilda, he waited for them to remove the bodies. Then he began digging. Sub-Atlantis Street, 13.02.2022, 0817. Shepard had blasted a hole into the shaft. He had stuck his head inside to find that it was blocked in both directions. There were rosters above and below. Tilda, okay, this is going to complicate things. Tilda. You're not the first to try to escape, a male voice began. That's why they gave that house to man you found. Shepard pulled his head out of the shaft and turned around to see Todd, but then remember where he was. He was looking at the local version of Todd. Like the rest of locals, he was thin and pale, and like the Wraith of this universe, he lacked a feeding hand. Todd, or guide, was standing outside the house on the other side of the shaft. Tilda must be his place. Tilda. Really? He was an informant for the Terrans. That's why he was murdered and robbed, Todd said. Somebody found out, and that was it for him. I'm John Shepard, by the way, Shepard said. And you are? Guide said with a nod. So, Guide, you up for an escape? Shepard tapped on the wall of the shaft. Because I have an Atlantis in an alternative universe to save, and there is no way that I can do that from in here. So me and my friends are breaking out. You are certain of yourself. The town graveyard is filled with people who made the same mistake, Shepard. I don't doubt it, but, Shepard sighed. I lost a lot of my friends when that city was destroyed. He had done his best not to think about it, but now it was coming home. What else do I have to lose? There was a pause, then Guide walked into his house. He came back with what appeared to be a wooden cylinder, but when he handed it to Shepard, it turned out to be something else. The piece of wooden had been hollowed out. It had also been fitted with 2 mirrors and 2 lenses, which converted it into a crude periscope. You're not the only one with escape plans, John. This is nice work, Shepard said as he used the periscope to take a closer look at the inside of the shaft. And it may have just gotten us a step closer to getting out of here. He handed the device to Guide and pointed to a section of the shaft. Right there, see it? Wait. He used the periscope to study the section that Shepard had indicated. I've never seen that before. I've studied this shaft using that. He pointed to a roster higher up the shaft. But I've never been able to make my own hole, so I was never able to check this section out. What are we looking at? An electricity cable. The gate that blocks the way to the second circle is too heavy for a single person to lift by hand. To there is probably an electric motor connected to a lever on the other side, where we can't see it. This cable provides power to that motor. So we can cut the power and lock the guards out. Even better. Once the power is cut, we can lift the gate just far enough to have somebody slip through. Then we reconnect the power and the person on the other side pulls the lever, and we have our passage to the second circle. And then what? Then we start working on getting down to the third circle. Sounds like a plan, Banks said as she joined them. But how do we do the reconnecting part? Guide didn't say anything, but the smile on his face made it clear that he had a plan. Sub-Atlantis Cell 13.02.2022, 0821. While one version of Guide was helping Shepard escape, another had managed to make a hole in the floor of his cell. The large stones were connected to one another and the walls by means of rebar. But some stones were too small for that to work. He had found a small collection of stones that he could remove. It had allowed him to create a hole that was big enough to reveal that there was nothing underneath the floor but sand. The hole was not big enough to escape through. Still, he had kept digging. Suddenly, there was a loud crack. Guide looked down to see. Green. Tilda, what in the world? Tilda, he stopped digging and lay down on the floor so that he could get a closer look at whatever was below. Tilda, impossible. Tilde beyond the hole was a collection of plants. Guide realized that this meant that his cell was on the lowest level of the prison part of wherever he was. The level below his location appeared to be a massive greenhouse. It made sense. If they shipped the food in from some off-world source, the prisoners might be able to use the dock as an escape route. So they grew the food for the prisoners on the planet itself. The question was, how could use this discovery to get out of here? Sub-Atlantis Street, 13.02.2022, 0828. The answer to Banks' question had shocked Shepard. He and his version of Guide had been through a lot. But what had happened now had surprised even him. A young head had poked out of his house. That young head had belonged to a young Wraith called Pedro. It was at this point that Shepard had discovered that the Wraith of this universe reproduced the old-fashioned way. And not only that, Guide was married to a human woman called Anita. A brunette with short hair and brown eyes, she was the mother of 3 children with Guide: Pedro, Zach, and Jenna. Jenna was the only girl of the bunch and the youngest. She was also the only one to fit inside the air shaft. "Are you okay in there?" Banks asked. "I'm fine, Miss B." Nearby, Shepard and the rest of the adults were getting ready to lift the gate. Pedro and Zach were ready to do some slithering and lever pulling. The colonel gave her a nod, and Banks gave Jenna a signal. The young girl took the knife from Shepard's house and cut the wire. As soon as it was done, she smiled at Banks. "Power cut, Colonel." Shepard nodded and they lifted the gate. Pedro and Zach quickly made their way to the other side. Shepard gave Banks a thumbs up, who then signaled Jenna. She fudged the wire back together. Seconds later, the gate came up. Banks helped Jenna climb out of the shaft and they joined the others. "Here we go," Shepard began. "I'm the only one with a weapon, so I'll go first." "Sounds like a plan." They made their way down the stairs with Shepard in the lead. Pedro and Zach joined them when they were halfway to the bottom. They reached the bottom to find another gate. There was a big red button in the wall to the right. The street beyond looked clear, so Banks pushed the button. There was a pause, but the gate did go up. Shepard stepped through first. So far, so good. The rest of them joined him. Alas, they did not make it very far. A pair of doors hidden in the walls swung open, and they were quickly surrounded by Terran guards. They readied their weapons and prepared to fire. 11 complications. USS Spira Shuttle Bay, 13.02.2022, 0800. Spira had landed on a desert moon, codenamed Delta. Delta was located in the same solar system as the frozen planet that had been Atlantis' home. The science team figured this was their best option because they had several years' worth of data on the local star. It would be the easiest to do the math on their time travel plans. Another reason was the fact that they had a map of Delta. It had showed a section of the planet where was water, and they could easily build a camp. Between Mitchell's expedition and the people from the Liberty, there were more people than there were quarters aboard the ship. So they had landed and built Camp Pegasus. "Thank you, Ajax," Laura Cadman said as she made his into the shuttle bay. Ajax was the ancient who had designed Spira back in the day. He had also been the rogue scientist of his generation, and he had added plenty of features that had not been requested by his bosses. One of these features had been several spaces where landing gear could easily be installed should somebody decide it was necessary, which was exactly what the engineers refitting the ship at Earth had done. And it wasn't the first time that Ajax's rule-bending had come in handy. "Time to visit our little home away from home," Vale said as entered the bay as well. "Did we really need to pitch all the tents?" Cadman asked as they climbed down a ladder to the desert floor. "We needed to house 19 people, not the full 60. Camp Pegasus had been built using the ship's emergency supplies, which included everything needed to settle the whole crew on a planet in a pinch. Not that I'm complaining, just being curious here, boss." "Good question," Vale began. "And to answer your question, yes, we did, Vale led the way to the camp. Those extra tents are for a little surprise for our Terran friends. What kind of surprise? Vale was about to answer when the conversation was interrupted by two Scottish people yelling at one another. Seconds later, Dylan Calhoun and Nicholas Rush came from one of the tents. Neither Vale or Cadman could understand a word of what they were saying, but it was pretty clear that the two were pretty angry at one another. Tilda makes sense to me, Tilda Cadman thought. Tilda Calhoun is mad at Rush for abandoning the family, and Rush is mad at Calhoun for not telling him he joined the program. Tilda, before either of she or Vale could speak up, Dr. Beckett came from one of the nearby tents. Beckett proceeded to give both men a scolding in Scottish. Much to Cadman's surprise, when he was done, neither of them had a comeback. "Carson," Vale began, "what did you just tell them?" "That's their family, that the past doesn't matter. Because the situation is what it is and arguing won't change it, and that there is a whole city riding on us pulling this mission off. So they should stop acting like idiots and make this thing happen." "Aye," Vale said before turning to Cadman. "Shall we, Colonel?" "We shall, Colonel." They entered the camp. The tents that were being used to house the extra personnel stood to the right of a central path, while the extra tents were to the left. These tents were connected to form one big structure. Vale entered this structure, which was where his surprise was waiting. When Cadman saw the surprise, she whistled. She had a feeling that the Terrans would never see this coming. Sub-Atlantis Street, 13.02.2022, 0830. Shepard couldn't believe that his story was about to end here. "Tilda, I survived the destruction of Atlantis, and now this?" "Tilda," he put himself between the children and the guards. That was when something surprising happened. Instead of the guards killing them, there was a high-pitched sound. It didn't affect Shepard's group, but the guards grabbed their heads. Their weapons fell to the ground, with them following several seconds later. The sound faded and Banks checked the pulse of one of the guards. "They're alive," she said. "What was that?" Pedro asked. "A sonic grenade," a female voice said. "One of only 3 we were able to smuggle in. It sends out a pulse that is amplified by Terran communications equipment." The voice belonged to a robed figure, which had approached from deeper in the circle. There was something familiar about the voice, but Shepard couldn't place it, until the robed figure got close and took down the hood of her cloak. "Tilda, no way. It can't be. Tilda," he heard Guide gasp behind him. She drew a crude sword and pointed it at Shepard, who was still protecting the children. "Taylor," Banks asked. "How do you know me?" "Of course we know you," Guide began. "You are a legend, Taylor Dex of Saita," he looked at Shepard. "In our universe, Taylor and her husband Ronan were generals in the Satan army. It was the last world to fall to the Empire. Ronan was killed in the assault." "Our universe," Taylor said. "This is not the Emperor," Guide said. "He is from somewhere else." "And why should I believe you?" Taylor gave Shepard a dirty look. Instead of doing the universe a favor, she put the tip of her weapon to Shepard's throat, and killing this, there was hate burning in her eyes. "Thing." "Gamma Alpha 12 Zeta 5, Guide said, making Taylor drop her sword. "I am one," he turned to Shepard. "I killed the man who used to live in the house you now occupy." "Yeah, I figured as much," Shepard said. "Tilda, here we go." Tilda, he had figured it out as soon as Guide had told him what had happened to the man. But I didn't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, so he had simply not said anything. "So, care to clue me in?" "Circles 1 through 5 have resistance cells," Guide said. "The leaders of the cells are codenamed after their circle. I am 1. Delta Beta 2, 1 Alpha 3, Taylor said as she put away her sword away. "I am 2. She turned to Shepard. "So you are leading this operation?" "It's an escape," Shepard began, "which will end very badly if we don't get out of here now." "Follow me," Keela said. The group followed Taylor, leaving the stunned guards on the ground. None of them noticed a figure in the shadows. The figure took out a small radio and activated it. Something told the onlooker that she would want to know about this. Atlantis Royal Chambers, Balcony 13.02.2022, 0833. Empress Amelia Shepard looked at the capital city of Terran Empire. Tilda well, at least in the Pegasus territories. Tilda, one of her spies in what the slaves called Sub-Atlantis, had just given her a very interesting piece of information. Inside their quarters, her husband and his admiral were planning the invasion of the alternate reality. Even with the vast resources of 3 galaxies at their disposal, the Terrans would need a well-prepared combat strategy to take over the territory Emperor John wanted to claim on the other side of the dimensional divide. From what she had heard, his goal was to conquer both the Pegasus Galaxy and the Milky Way Galaxy once more. Tilda, alas for him, he will never see that day. Tilda, she took a deep breath and went into their quarters. "John," she said to her husband, who was standing over a large table with a map. "Yes," Shepard said, looking up from the map. "The day has come for you to die." Before he could even blink, she drew an energy weapon and vaporized him with a single shot. The battery was good for 5 shots, so she vaporized the 4 highest-ranking admirals as well. That done, she put the weapon down on the table. Then she turned to Admirals Evan Lorne and Jonas Quinn, the only 2 left alive. "Now, are you loyal to me, or do I need to call security?" The 2 men bowed to her, answering her question. "Good," she smiled at their fear. "Admiral Quinn, one of my spies just told me that my husband's counterpart is in Sub-Atlantis. Arrange for him to be brought to me." "What about your own counterpart, ma'am?" "Kill her." "Yes, ma'am." Quinn bowed and walked out. As soon as he gone, Shepard gestured for Lorne to join her at the slightly scorched map table. She had the conquest of another universe to plan. Delta Camp Pegasus, 10th 13.02.2022, 0900. The surprise inside the tent had once been a gold cargo ship. In fact, it had been the cargo ship that had been recovered after the attack on Saita. While the ship itself would never fly again, 2 of its escape pods had survived, so these had been salvaged from the craft. They had then been modified using salvaged components from the ship, creating a superpod that they would use for their plan to rewrite history and save Atlantis. Of course, they had to get there first. Cadman was watching as Ali and the other eggheads were doing the math on how to do that when Colonel Mitchell came in. The look on his face made it clear that there was a problem. "What's wrong?" she asked. "We've been going over the sensor logs of the Liberty, and," he took out a data pad, which had the sensor data on it. "2 people were beamed off Atlantis by another cargo ship. We've identified them as Amelia Banks and Colonel Shepard. So they've been captured, and we have no idea where they are now." "Yes." Cadman nodded. She understood that this made Mitchell unhappy. But if they succeeded, Shepard and Banks would never been captured, and this whole thing would become a non-issue. Tilda, on the other hand, this whole thing might lead to complications down the line. Tilda, alas, only time would tell. 12 advances. Atlantis Armory, 313.02.2022, 0845. Admiral Jonas Quinn was a rarity. The bulk of the admirals that ran the Terran fleet were from Earth, but Quinn was from Langara, one of the older colony worlds. Being one of the older worlds, it was home to an imperial shipyards, which had provided Quinn with way into the fleet. Over the years, he had climbed the ranks to Rear Admiral lower half. He had been assigned as second-in-command of the Pegasus Reserve Fleet under Rear Admiral upper half Evan Lorne. Tilda promotion time, Tilda Quinn thought as he grabbed an energy rifle from the armory. The Pegasus Galaxy was covered by 3 galaxies. When the galaxy had been conquered, it had been divided into First Fleet Zone and the Second Fleet Zone. As for the Reserve Fleet, it was based at Memphis, the only other city ship in the Pegasus Galaxy. Quinn figured that if he played his cards right, he could become commander of both the reserve fleet and governor of Memphis. Of course, he would have to avoid the wrath of Empress Shepard first, so he would go down and collect this other John Shepard. He had gathered a team of 16 soldiers to provide him security as he went down to sub-Atlantis. "Let's go." He led his group towards the elevator down to the slave city. Sub-Atlantis Cell 13.0.2.2022, 0903. Guide was not happy. He had made a hole, but not much more progress beyond that. These people were many things, but not stupid. He had tried to make the hole wider to no avail. His attempts to access the greenhouse systems had also failed. I need a new plan. The problem was that he didn't have any ideas on that front. Come on, guide, think. That was when the door opened and somebody threw something into his cell. Before he could move towards the door, it was slammed shut. He picked up the object and examined it. An ice pick. Then he noticed there was a small red button at the bottom of the device. He pressed it, and the device lit up, emitting a thin laser beam that quickly burned a tiny hole in the floor. Well, this creates options. He took the device and set to making another attempt at making the hole wider. As he did that, Lieutenant Jennifer Haley smiled. Like Jonah's Quinn, this version of Haley was from Langara. Between that and the fact that she was a female, getting promoted had been next to impossible. But her superior, Captain Harry Mayborn, had made enemies in the wrong places. When she had heard that about the alternate Wraith, she figured that it was only a matter of time before the creature tried to escape. And if it succeeded, then Mayborn would get executed. And she would be promoted to captain. So she had given the Wraith a laser cutter. Now all she had to do was wait. Sub-Atlantis Street, 13.02.2022, 0903. The second circle was not all that different from the first circle. There were several security checkpoints, but the natives had managed to find ways around them. A hole in the wall here, a passage through the sewer there. Simple bridges connecting roofs. It turned out not to be that complicated to bypass the local guards. Timing their movements well, Shepard and company had quickly made their way to the stairwell down to the third circle. The problem was that there was another checkpoint here, and this one could not be bypassed. "So now what?" Guide asked. "We can blast our way through," Shepard said. "No, that would draw reinforcements from the third circle," Taylor said. "And I don't have my other stun grenades here. Besides, it would take too long. We have to be away from here before the stunned guards at the other stairs wake up." Shepard studied the checkpoint. There were 6 guards between them and they stairway down to the third circle. They were armed with energy rifles. The problem was that, like Shepard's weapon, they appeared to have DNA locks. This meant that taking the weapons from the guards was totally useless. So all they had to work with was Shepard's handgun. The thought was cut off by the sound of a siren cutting through the second circle. This made the guards exchange looks. Then the ranking officer barked something, and 4 of them bolted. Shepard looked at his companions, only to see Guide smiling. "Something you want to share?" Sub-Atlantis has been expanded and remodeled several times, and the work was not always as precise as it should have been, Guide said. "We found part of the old fire alarm and got it working. I guess the rest of my cells figured out what we were up to and that we needed a distraction." "Smart." With only 2 guards to worry about, Shepard drew his energy pistol. He set the weapon to stun and shot the guards. Guide gave him a surprised look. But Shepard quickly picked up one of the guards and dragged his to the controls for the gate. Next to the lever to raise the gate was a hand scanner. Shepard put the guard's hand on the scanner and pulled the lever. They then dragged the guards into the guard station and grabbed their keys, which they used to lock them in. That done, the group headed for the third circle. Sub-Atlantis First Circle, 13.02.2022, 0903. Quinn and his team had been searching the first circle for Shepard and his cohorts. This had been complicated by the confirmation of a rumor he had heard about the city of slaves. Said rumor was that there was a resistance movement in sub-Atlantis. The resistance had made communications more difficult by using a fire alarm to create a tremendous amount of noise. As it was clear that their target was not on this level, he ordered his group to move on to the second circle. They were on their way there when they encountered a large group of security personnel. Tilda they responded to the fire alarm. The idiots tilda the fact that they were here meant that the entire second circle was empty. It also meant that their target was probably on the third circle by now. Quinn gave hand signals to his own troops and the security personnel. Soon, they were headed out. Sub-Atlantis Cell 13.0.2.2022 0910. By using the laser device against the right spots, Guide had been able to make the hole wide enough to escape through. This, however, left him with another problem. The distance between the ceiling and the floor of the greenhouse was 10 meters. He could make the jump without breaking anything. The problem was that it would make considerable noise hitting the floor, so he would have to pick the right moment to make his move. He lay down on the floor to study the movement below. The people walking down there were wearing Terran uniforms. Tilda guards. Tilda they were tending to large, green plants. Based on the equipment and tools which looked well-maintained, Guide figured that this food was for the guards and not the slaves. Tilda nothing for it but to wait. Tilda. Atlantis Royal Chambers 13.0.2.2022 0918. Empress Shepard's spies had provided her with an update on how things were going down in sub-Atlantis. And so far, Admiral Quinn's performance was not making her happy. She had been able to vaporize her husband and the admirals because there were no loyal security officers in the rooms. But it was only a matter of time before the wrong people found out. Then they would kill her and take control of the Empire, unless she could gather enough support. But for that, she would need time. So she would need this other Shepard to keep the truth hidden. Tilda, and if he refuses to aid me, I will wipe out the city of slaves. Tilda. In the meantime, she would continue preparing for the invasion of the alternate reality. The war was not her long-term plan, but it was well known that John had wanted to invade the other universe, and to keep up the illusion of John still being alive, she would have to launch this war. Then a couple of weeks in, she would frame General Landry for his death and have him executed. Hank Landry was the general in charge of the Pegasus Galaxy Ground Forces, and he was not a fan of the Shepard dynasty, so framing him for murder would be easy. As for the first name on her potential ally list, that currently belonged to Evan Lorne. She would promoted Lorne to commander of the first Pegasus fleet, then she would install the right person as his second in command. That way, Lorne would stay in line. Or else, his second in command would deal with him. As for Quinn, he would have to settle for commander of the Pegasus Reserve Fleet. That was presuming he didn't mess up his current assignment and get himself executed. Tilda, which isn't looking very likely so far. Tilda. She was about to ask from an update from her agent in the third circle when somebody rang the bell to the royal chambers. Her rule was about to face its first challenge. Sub-Atlantis Cell 13.0.2.2022 0919. Much to Guide's surprise, his chance came a lot sooner than he expected. It turned out that the guards loved their cigarettes, cigars, and pipes. As soon as they went for their various smokes, he pocketed his little tools and climbed down into the hole. He gave things below one last look, then let himself drop. As expected, he landed without breaking anything, but it was indeed far from silent. So he bolted from the place where he had landed. Fortunately for him, he was on one end of one of the greenhouses. There were several of them in a circle. He reached the end of the greenhouse and found that the doors to the next one were not locked. Tilda arrogant fools probably presumed that the cells above were escape-proof. Tilda, by the time the guards reached the place where he had landed, Guide was 2 greenhouses away. Tilda, I can't keep running in circles. Tilda, he looked around and spotted an air vent. It wasn't locked either, so he simply opened it and crawled inside. After several meters, he came across a vertical shaft, so he began climbing upwards. "Come to Atlantis, we'll have a few laughs," he grumbled as he climbed. And here I was, thinking this was going to be an easy attack. He managed to climb up 3 levels. The vent stopped at this point. Not as stupid as I thought. And this end had a grill of it that was locked in place. Guide took out his laser device and set to cutting his way out of the vent. Sub-Atlantis Street, 13.02.2022, 0932. Getting through the 3rd circle had taken more time than passing through 2nd circle. There were security measures that made breaking through walls and bridging roofs impossible. There was also a security system that blocked passage to the circle's sewers. Well, officially. But the local resistance cell, led by a Wraith female called Petra, had found ways around that. The problem had been that the 3rd circle sewers were quite the labyrinth, so getting to the passage to the 4th circle had been not as straightforward as Shepard had hoped. And now they were facing a major headache. A man who looked an awful lot like Jonas Quinn was in command of a large group of soldiers and guards. They had lined up dozens of slaves and were holding them hostage. I don't like this. Shepard and his group were watching the situation from the shadows. He had a bad feeling about where this was headed. "Shepard," Quinn began. "I know you are out there. You and Banks have 1 minute to surrender. After that, I start shooting people." "You can't trust him," Taylor said. "He will kill you and then he will kill the hostages." "Maybe," Shepard began, "but we're going to have to risk it." He knew that Taylor was right, but he had told to do something, because he could not just sit in the shadows and risk these people getting killed, and it appeared that Quinn did not know about Guide and his family, nor Taylor and her allies. And in his mind, this was the best of the options they had available to them. Admitted, "They are all bad, but you still have to choose, John." He exchanged a look with Banks, then walked out of the shadows. Banks gave Taylor a nod and followed him. As soon as they walked into view, Quinn turned to them. Well, the infamous John Shepard," Quinn said with a sadistic smile. "Not such a tactic genius after all." He turned to 2 of the guards. "You know what to do with him." The guards nodded. They put cuffs around his wrists and took him away. The last Banks saw of him, he was headed towards the stairs back to the 2nd circle. They're probably taking him to the city above. The question was, why? As for Banks, 2 soldiers grabbed her and took her to hostages. They forced her to her knees, then turned to Quinn. "Orders, Admiral." "The Empress made it clear that she wanted Miss Banks dead," Quinn began. "And I think that it is time we send a message to the local resistance cells. So, let's kill 2 birds with 1 stone." "Yes, Admiral." The soldiers and the guards lined up and readied their weapons. Banks got the bad feeling that her story was about to end right here and now. Sub-Atlantis Street, 13.02.2022, 0932. Down in the 7th circle, Guide was dodging traps and guards. It had taken several minutes for him to cut his way out of the vent. He had ended up getting lucky because he had dropped into a broom closet. From there, he had made his way to the room next door. That room had been the armory. While the weapons had proved to be useless, having been fitted with some kind of security lock, he had found a goggle that allowed the guards to see the traps. Like the level he had been on, this level was a collection of cells. Between the cells were corridors that were secured by means pressure plates hidden underneath the stones that made up the floor. They weren't under all the stones, having been placed randomly. Besides these, there were trip wires, lasers, and guard patrols. Having dodged all that, he had just reached what appeared to be an elevator. The problem was that it was being guarded by 2 Terrans, and he lacked a weapon. It was time for him to get creative.